Okay, good morning everyone. How are you today? Are you doing great? Good or great? Okay, for some of you who are still a bit like, try to become great, today we are going to learn something that's very important. The topic of today's lecture is something that need to be owned by us as an engineering student, yeah? Because we are working not by knowledge, but also by ethics. We have to know how we can deal with many engineering issues and problems using the right ethics, understanding the right concept and principle. And today we are very glad to have Professor Karin. Thank you so much. Welcome to ITS. We can have a very big applause for Prof. Karin. Rivaldo, could you please show the profile of Prof. Karin? And I also would like to say thank you so much to Prof. Moses, our senior professor, who also are willing to come with all of you to inquire something new. Yeah. So this is the profile. You can check yourself later on because there are a lot of information in this website. So Professor Karin is a professor from KTH Sweden. KTH, what does it stand for, Prof?
Kungliga Tekniska Högskolan, which means Royal Institute of Technology. So, yes, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I have to mention that KTH is a very high-ranked university. I checked from the QS World University ranking, and the ranking of your university actually now is 74.
Yes.
Right, 74 in the whole world, okay? So we have to learn from the expert because European countries is already advanced in terms of sustainability, sustainable development and things, and especially when we learn about the practices in advanced country, developed country, we certainly can get insight and how we also make Indonesia, our beloved country, also advance in many term and area, okay? So Professor Karin, very sorry for a very short introduction, but I believe you have time to also sharing with all of us. And for your information, students here come from different courses. How many of you from undergrad? How many of you undergrad student? Okay, how many of you postgrad student? Okay, so mix between undergrad and postgrad, but I believe the topic that we are going to discuss today suitable for all level, even for us, because as engineer we have to understand, to know the good principle, the good practices, and I believe today Prof. Karin welcome question and also discussion with you, so don't hesitate to ask, okay? Enjoy the program. Big applause for Prof. Karin. Thank you.
Good morning, students, and thank you very much, Maria, Professor Maria, for inviting me to give this guest lecture at your beautiful university, your beautiful campus. And thank you also, Professor Moses, for inviting me and for attending this lecture. Maria said that you can learn a lot from KTH. I believe that this goes both directions. I'm very happy to be here because I also want to learn more about Indonesia and about the sustainability challenges that you face in Indonesia, which I think are to some extent similar to Swedish challenges, but also perhaps on a different scale because your society looks a bit different to the one I'm used to. So I'm very happy to be here and to share my experience and to listen to your views on sustainable development and the role of engineers in creating more sustainable societies. So Maria gave a brief introduction. Maybe I can say something more about myself. I have been at the KTH for quite some time. I graduated as a PhD student in 2008 and became assistant professor and then associate professor and then professor. So I was in this tenure track program for a while. I've been teaching engineering ethics to our engineering students for many years, which I find is very rewarding. I live in Lindholmen, which is a very small village, I guess you could say, outside of Stockholm, in the Stockholm metropolitan area. So I'm married with 2 children, and we also have a cat at home, so a pet. Also a hamster, actually. One of my daughters is quite fond of small furry animals. What else can I say about myself? I have been to Indonesia before, once. I came to the ITS last year in September, which was great. So I fully enjoy your country, beautiful country, lovely food, very friendly people, and so on. So I'm very happy to be back. So let's see if I can say something about my university, maybe. KTH is Sweden's largest technical university. It was established in 1827, so nearly 200 years. In 2 years from now, we will celebrate our 200 years, so there will be a big celebration in the KTH campus. As Maria said, we are ranked 74 in the world among all universities, according to the QS World University Rankings. And we have around something like 17,000 students. So it's, I don't know how many students you have at 27,000. So we are much smaller university than you then. Around 35% of our students are women. So it's still quite male dominated, especially in the more engineering faculties in Sweden. But it's improving in terms of gender equality. And we also have quite a few international students, around 2,300 international students, mostly at the master level, who come to Sweden. The biggest group comes from China, then it's India, but actually on 3rd place is Indonesia. So very good. We have a lot of Indonesian students admitted to our programs. This year it was around 187 students admitted to KTH from Indonesia. So we're very happy about that. So before going into the more heavy stuff, I thought we would have a small quiz, so to find out what you know about Sweden. So I have 3 questions, and I will ask the questions. The professors may not answer, only students. And as soon as you think you have the answer to a question, please raise your hand. So this is the first question. What is the capital of Sweden? Is it Copenhagen? Is it Helsinki? Or is it Stockholm? Yes? Stockholm, very good. So, woo. You will get this. It's from the KTH, but it's not as nice as the one I got from your university. Very good. So it's Stockholm. What can we say about Stockholm? So let me see. Let's do it like that. Yes, Stockholm is the most populous city in Sweden. It's the largest urban area in the Nordic countries. So there are 5 Nordic countries. It's Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Iceland, right? So those are the Nordic countries, all quite small countries. So in the whole of Sweden, we have 10 million inhabitants. So it's not big. In Stockholm, we have around 1.6 million inhabitants in the urban area and around 2.4 million inhabitants in the metropolitan area. So it's still smaller than Surabaya, right? Because Surabaya is something like 3.5 million or, yeah. So still a quite small city by global standards. It was founded in 1252 by the Swedish statesman Birger Jarl. And this is where the KTH is located. It's located quite in the middle of Stockholm. So has anyone been to Stockholm or Sweden? No? You have to come then. But do come in summer. Otherwise it will be a shock to your system. It can be quite cold in winter. So the other week we had like -2 degrees and snow. Yes. But now it's improving. It's spring in Sweden. Okay, so next question. You gotta be quick now. No, sorry. Okay. Which prize is awarded in Stockholm City Hall in December every year? Is it the Polar Prize? Suitable name for Sweden. Or is it the Nobel Prize? Or is it the Booker Prize? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Great. It is the Nobel Prize. Yes. Nobel Prize. So what can I say about the Nobel Prize? Well, it's one of the most prestigious international awards given annually in recognition of outstanding contributions in various fields. It was established by a Swedish industrialist called Alfred Nobel. He's best known for inventing dynamite. He dedicated his fortune to creating prizes that reward those who have conferred the greatest benefit to humankind. So all the prizes are presented in Stockholm annually at the prize ceremony. It always takes place on the 10th of December every year in Stockholm Concert Hall. And the following banquet is organized at Stockholm City Hall. And this slide is from Stockholm City Hall. And I don't know if you can see, but you will see the dean of school. You will meet with him later today, right? Because you will also attend the lecture by Professor Björnberg. So here he is, giving out the diplomas for the new PhD graduates from KTH. Okay, so last question. Who is the best-selling Swedish artist of all time? Is it ABBA? Is it Avicii? Or is it Swedish House Mafia? Yes. ABBA, yes. Very good. Excellent, excellent students. Yes, ABBA. What can we say about ABBA? Perhaps not a very well-known pop group within your age group. They were very popular when I grew up in the 1970s and 80s, with hits like Mamma Mia, Money Money, Waterloo. I don't know, Professor Maria, you know them, maybe. Yeah, yes. So, but yeah, there's actually an ABBA museum in Stockholm. You can go and see some history about this pop group. Okay, so maybe we should go back to some more serious stuff then. So I want to talk today about engineering ethics and sustainable development, and the critical role that engineers play in shaping a more sustainable future, and also about the ethical responsibility in promoting environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable development. And when I do this today, I am going to do so from and this is quite important, I think. I'm a philosopher, and I was trained in the Western philosophical tradition. So I will talk today from a Western perspective, because it's all I know. But I have no knowledge, or very little knowledge, about the philosophy and the philosophical traditions of Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on. But I know that there are philosophical traditions, like stemming from, for example, Buddhism, Buddhist thought, etc. But today I will talk about this from a Western tradition, and when I say a Western tradition, I mean sort of a Judeo-Christian tradition, and also maybe a Greek antiquity tradition. So it's a bit of a restricted perspective, I suppose, but it's what I know most about. So why then should engineers be bothered about ethical issues? Why isn't it enough that engineers simply produce technical artifacts or systems, things that we can use to make our lives go better? And well, I think that the answer to this question is well captured by the preamble to the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers Code of Conduct. In this preamble, two things are emphasized. First of all, it says, technology and science are powerful tools in the service of humanity for good or ill. They have fundamentally transformed society and will continue to profoundly influence humanity in the future. And I think this is the first reason why it is important for engineers to think about ethical issues and about sustainability, because the things that you produce actually have a great impact on society. And there are many examples from history of how technical inventions have transformed our societies. And here are just a few examples from a Western European perspective. So in the 15th century, Gutenberg's printing press was invented in Western Europe. At this point in time, printing was already in place in Asia, but not in Western Europe. We didn't know how to do it. The printing press was invented, and this made it possible to distribute information and ideas to a much larger segments of society than before. And this actually eventually changed the structure of society, because previously books were very rare. I mean, it was only privileged people, very privileged people, who had access to books. And they were mostly kept in libraries, in monasteries, and read by monks who were able to read. But when the printing press was invented, information and ideas started to spread to larger groups of society in Europe. And people started reading, and they started questioning the norms and foundations of society. So this eventually gave rise to the Reformation in Europe. Maybe you've heard about it. It's a major theological movement in Western Christianity that challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church was predominant in Europe at the time, but people started questioning the authority of the papacy and bishops and priests and so on. And this eventually led to the beginning of Protestantism. So there was a split within Western Christianity between Catholics and Protestants, and there were major wars in Europe over the centuries that followed. So that's just one example of how a technological invention can actually change society. This is another example. I'm not sure if you know what this is. Yes, exactly, textile, exactly. It's the spinning jenny. It was invented by the British industrialist James Hargreaves in 1764 to 65. It was a multi-spindle spinning frame that played a key role in the so-called Industrial Revolution in Western Europe. This spinning frame reduced the amount of work needed to produce cloth, since it made it possible for one worker to work on 8 or more spools at a time. So it was highly efficient if you compared to previously. And so this invention then made it much more efficient, and it also helped to start the factory system of cotton manufacturing in Western Europe, so mass manufacturing. Here's another example, a more recent example of maybe not a technical invention, but more of a medical invention. It's the birth control pill that was introduced in the 1960s. And it also had a great impact on Western European society, as it made it possible for family planning. So it allowed women to be part of the labor force to a much larger degree than what was previously the case. So these are just a few examples of how technology and science have shaped society in various ways, and mostly for the better. And I'm sure that similar examples can be found in your history, in Indonesian history, with inventions creating societal change. So the second thing that is emphasized in the code of conduct of the Swedish engineers is that it is actually the engineers that are you are the carriers of this technological knowledge. You have the knowledge. You are possessing the knowledge, the power to transform society into a better place for people to live. So the Code of Conduct says that engineers are the bearers and stewards of technical knowledge. This gives them, you, a special responsibility to ensure that technology is used for the good of society and humanity, and that it is passed on in an improved form to future generations. So actually possessing, having this power, having this knowledge also comes, with it comes some form of responsibility. So this is where ethics come into play. And this is also something that engineers themselves started to realize as engineering rose as a distinct profession in the 19th century and early 20th century. So in the 19th century in Europe, several significant structural failures occurred that forced the profession to confront shortcomings in technical and construction practice, as well as ethical standards. And this is just one historical example, the Tay Bridge disaster in 1879. This bridge was designed by a structural engineer called Sir Thomas Couch, and it was completed in 1879. And only a year later, it collapsed. It collapsed during a storm when a train was passing over the bridge. And you can see that over there that it has collapsed. All the passengers in the train went into the cold, icy cold water. Everyone on board was killed. So it was a tragic accident. And investigations showed that the design actually contained some structural deficiencies, which led to the collapse of the bridge. And this was a very important lesson at the time, because it showed how crucially engineering impacts on public safety. And one response to this was the development of formal codes of ethics by some of the early engineering societies, recognizing the paramount value of safety and welfare of the public and the engineer's professional responsibility to care for those values, safety and welfare of the public. Now, that engineers have a moral responsibility to care for the safety and welfare of the public is also recognized in modern codes of conduct of engineering societies and engineering professional organizations. For example, in this Code of Conduct of the National Society of Professional Engineers, which is an American professional association for licensed engineers. And now you can't really read this, I realized. But at the left hand there, yes, exactly, there you can see among the fundamental canons is that engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall hold paramount the safety, health and welfare of the public, safeguarding the public. And it is also increasingly recognized in these codes, modern codes of conduct, that engineers also have a responsibility not only to care for the safety and welfare of the public, but also to care for the environment, for sustainable development. So in this code at the right-hand side there, you can see that it states engineers are encouraged to adhere to the principle of sustainable development in order to protect the environment for future generations. So environment and sustainable development also comes into play for engineers when you do your work. Okay, so maybe we should take a closer look at the engineer's moral responsibility to care for the environment and sustainable development. What does it entail, and how can we sort of reason systematically about the engineer's moral duties? So let me see. I have a few discussion points that I would like to invite you to be part of. So Maria, can I ask you, are we going to have a break at some point, or? Small break, we can have a small break. Okay, great. So, okay. A little closer? Okay, sorry. So this is better? Okay. I'm not really used to, using a microphone. Okay, so let's take this discussion case. And I'm thinking that maybe you can discuss with your neighbor for some time, maybe 5 minutes or so. So I'll read it out just in case you cannot read it. So this is the Green Bridge project. So a city has commissioned the construction of a new pedestrian and bike bridge dubbed the Green Bridge to connect two parts of a city across a river. The river area includes sensitive wetland ecosystems and migratory bird nesting grounds. The primary goal is to promote sustainable transportation and reduce car dependency. The city wants the bridge to serve as a model for eco-friendly infrastructure and has asked for proposals that emphasize sustainability, innovation, and cost effectiveness. Your engineering firm proposes a design using recycled steel, solar-powered lighting, and an innovative low-impact foundation system. It slightly exceeds the budget, but offers long-term sustainability benefits. However, another firm submits a lower-cost design using conventional materials and construction techniques. Their plan is on budget, but may cause temporary disruption to the wetland area and does not include renewable energy features. Recently, your firm discovers that your innovative foundation system has not been tested on wetlands, and failure could risk environmental damage and public safety. So the questions I want you to discuss with your neighbor now are, should your firm disclose the uncertainty surrounding the new foundation system, even if it jeopardizes your bid? And why or why not? And also, if the winning firm's approach may harm the environment and you have evidence, should you intervene? Why or why not? So try to discuss these questions with your neighbor and try to come up with justifications for you why or why not you should do these things. So I'll give you like 4 to 5 minutes, okay? Yes. Yes. Mhm. Okay, so what should you do as an engineer in this case? What do you think? What is the right thing to do? Any ideas? Looking at you now. Do you want to answer?
Okay, based on my discussion with my friend, we prefer to choose the first option, which using the recycled steel, but we still haven't come up with the idea about how to tackle the environmental damage. So we come up with another question, why don't we test on the wetlands first before we implement it? So that's how.
Yes, thank you. So testing it before proposing it would be the right thing to do. Yes, to make sure that it actually works and is safe. Yes. Good, very good. Any other? Yes.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I want to add from my previous friend said that after testing, and if we found that the testing result is not good for the example for the safety and the environment, we have to like kind of develop the mitigation strategy. So even though our test result is bad or negative, we have to show our transparency, to show our responsibility how to overcome this result test. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. So testing and seeing if it actually works and then improving it based on the results of the test would be the responsible thing to do, right? What if the manager of your engineering firm says that, well, actually, we don't have the time. We need this winning bid now, and we are willing to do it. Okay, there is some uncertainty, but there is no time testing. We don't have the time. So we should just push ahead. That's a complicated situation, right? Because then you're faced with, okay, there is uncertainty. It might work, but it might actually lead to some structural failures, harming the environment. But what can you do as an individual engineer? You're just employed at this firm. Maybe it's very difficult for you to raise these issues with your manager. Maybe it's very difficult to, what can you do? Contact the press, go to the press and not tell them about it, then you will most likely be fired, right? Yeah. So it's a difficult situation. And I wanted to give you this case just to exemplify the kind of moral dilemmas that an engineer might face in his or her engineering work. And so the question is then, well, what is the right thing to do? Are there any structured ways of reasoning concerning what is good or bad, or right or wrong? What is the right action to do in a situation like this? Well, yes, there are actually structured ways of reasoning in issues like this. And that's where ethics, philosophy and ethics come into play. So ethics is about giving reasons for various actions. And I will now talk a little bit more about ethics. So, but I don't know what your background is in philosophy. Have you studied any philosophy in high school or ethics or anything in Indonesia? Prof. Maria, do you know?
Thank you. Unfortunately, maybe Professor Moses later can add a comment on this. Unfortunately, even though we realize that ethics is very important, there is no particular course addressing ethics. Usually what happens after we finish our undergraduate study and we want to get professional certification, we have to take ethics course. Yeah. However, our department try to somehow insert ethics messages in the several courses, but not particularly ethics course, something like that. That's why when I share about your topic to our WhatsApp group, consisting many senior lecturer and professor, all of them say it is very important for our students to know about ethics. Like the example that's shown here is really, we need to have guidance in processing our engineering decision. Thank you so much. Maybe Prof. Moses, do you want to add something?
Okay, thank you. Prof. Maria is correct. We don't have a special course in ethics. And I think ethics is based on, we have a different point of view. Ethics for ethics from your country and our country.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
what should we do for that?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I will give you some introduction then to
Yes.
some ethics or normative theories that one can use to reason about dilemmas like this.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I agree with Professor Moses and Professor Maria that I think it's quite important that these issues are actually integrated into engineering education quite early on. Already at the undergraduate level, you can start thinking about these issues. And then you can progress as your studies progress as well. So, so the question is then, are there any structured ways of reasoning concerning what is good or bad, and right and wrong? And there are many ways in which we can think about ethics and about the ethical justifications or requirements for our actions. And Western moral philosophy is dominated by three. Sorry about that. Represented by three metaphors, I guess one could say. So the first metaphor is that of weighing, which is represented by the scale. The other one is that of a limit, which is represented by the fence. And the third way of reasoning is represented by the compass, and it represents sort of orientation. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about these three normative or ethical theories, and they are very common in the Western philosophical tradition. So this is like the basic you would learn if you take a philosophy course, ethics course in Sweden, for example. So the lecturer would then start by talking about the scales on the left-hand side. And so one way of choosing between different actions, what is the right thing to do? What should I do? And one way of choosing between different actions is to specify the advantages and the disadvantages associated with each alternative, and then you choose the alternative that has the best consequences, the largest net advantage. And philosophers have introduced the term consequentialism to describe theories that evaluate actions and policies, choices in terms of their outcomes. So it's the outcomes that count, not your intentions, not rules, not duties or anything. So in a consequentialist perspective, an action is morally right if and only if it produces the best overall consequences. Okay? So it's a kind of simple idea, intuitively reasonable. So the question is then, well, what counts as what are good consequences, right? What is meant by good consequences? And one of the most important forms or varieties of consequentialism is the theory of utilitarianism, which was developed quite early on by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill in the 18th and 19th century in Britain, the UK. Now, utilitarianism is, as philosophers, we talk about monistic type of consequentialism, which means that it measures and evaluates the consequences of actions in terms of one single value, namely happiness or utility. Utility is a more philosophical term representing happiness, but happiness, we can think of happiness. So according to utilitarianism, happiness is the only thing that is valuable in itself. So philosophers talk about intrinsic value. It's the only thing that is valuable in itself, not as a means to something else that is invaluable, that is valuable. It's valuable in itself. So happiness is sought for its own sake. Right. So according to utilitarianism, an action is morally right if and only if it produces the greater overall happiness. Okay? Produces the best consequences in terms of happiness. Now, one interesting question then is, well, what is happiness? And that is a very, tough question, difficult question. And different traditions have given different answers, different philosophical traditions, different religions, perhaps, etc. So what is happiness? Different ideas about what happiness is. There are three dominant ideas within the Western philosophical tradition. We call them hedonistic theories, which basically means that you have pleasurable experiences. You experience pleasure and no pain, okay? That is happiness. But there is an alternative, desire fulfillment theories, which basically means that it's not just about having pleasurable experiences, but actually having what you want, satisfying your preferences. So you might have a preference for pain, actually. Then that preference is supposed to be satisfied according to this theory. Or you can have objective, so-called objective list theories, which basically means that you have what you need. It's not so much about what you want, because you could want all sorts of things that are not really good for you, actually. So satisfying those wants or preferences is not good for you. There is sort of a more objective list of things that make life go well for all people. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but I will talk a little bit more about the hedonistic theories, pleasure and pain. Now, this is Jeremy Bentham himself, who invented or introduced utilitarianism. He believed that happiness is the same thing as having pleasurable experiences. So in his book, An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, which was published in 1789, same year as the French Revolution, he lays the foundations of a so-called hedonistic version of utilitarianism. So he writes that nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure, and it is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as determine what we shall do. Not just as private individuals, but also governments should conduct their businesses in this way, adopt policies that lead to people having these pleasurable experiences. Now, John Stuart Mill, who was a bit younger than Jeremy Bentham, he did not exactly agree with Bentham that happiness in terms of just any pleasures is what happiness means. So instead, he recognized the complexity of human experience. So people, he argued, seek like higher fulfillment, not just satisfying basic pleasures in terms of food or, whatever. So he famously wrote that, well, it's actually better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. So this is kind of a bit funny expressed, but it captures Mill's idea that there is a quality component to pleasure. So not all pleasurable experiences are equally valuable. So in Mill's view, there are some pleasures like intellectual pleasures, cultural pleasures, moral pleasures that matter more, are more valuable than simply bodily pleasure or whatever. So already quite early on in the history of utilitarianism, there were these different ideas about what happiness is. And since you're supposed to produce the greatest overall happiness, it's quite important to decide what happiness is. So this is a core issue for philosophers to determine. Now, utilitarianism has, as a normative theory, it has some strengths, most notably impartiality in the sense that it treats all individuals equally. So everyone's happiness counts equally in the happiness calculus. And this was quite a progressive idea at the time. So the king's pleasures are not more important than the ordinary man's or ordinary woman's. So one person's well-being is not more important than another's. So there's this idea of equality here, which I think is one of the strengths of this idea. But there are also difficulties with this way of reasoning. It is quite difficult to measure happiness. So maximizing overall happiness presupposes that you can sort of compare happiness across groups of individuals, but making these interpersonal utility or happiness comparisons are difficult because happiness is an internal, personal experience. So one person might love classical music and get enormously amounts of pleasure from it, while another feels bored. And people also report happiness differently. So when we ask people, what makes you happy? Does this make you happy? And someone might say, not really. And someone else is like, no, it's horrible. But they might feel the same. So it's quite difficult to measure. Also, it has been argued that utilitarianism and consequentialism on a more general level can actually justify some acts that are immoral. So if an action is judged morally right or wrong based only on the consequences, the happiness or the outcomes it produces, then no action whatsoever seems to be morally impermissible or morally wrong simply in itself. So any action is okay, as long as it gives rise to the best consequences. And that sort of seems to run counter to people's intuitions. So even the most fundamental values, such as human rights, can be violated if there is a positive net sum of consequences on this view, possibly. It has also been argued that, well, actually, utilitarianism is very demanding. If I can produce the best or greatest happiness for the greatest number of people by giving away all my money to charities, for example, maybe that is what I should do, according to this normative theory. And most people would be like, well, that doesn't really seem reasonable. I want to keep some money. Why can I not, keep money for myself or my children, even if that doesn't produce the best overall consequences? So it also runs a bit counter to our intuitions. It has also been criticized for ignoring personal relationships that exist between people. So as I said, in the utilitarian calculus, everyone counts the same. So whoever receives the pleasure is irrelevant. It's total amount of pleasure that counts in the end. However, in daily life, some people's happiness has a greater impact on us as individuals than the happiness of others. So think of your children or your family members. So it has been argued that actually we have moral obligations towards the people that we have a personal relationship with. So I have a moral obligation to provide for my children. So it's not reasonable for me to give away all my money to charity and then see my children, walk in poverty. So personal relationships seem to matter somehow. It's very difficult for us as individual beings to have this sort of impartial view and just calculate very impartially what the net benefits of specific actions are. Okay. So that was the scales. And as you might remember, the second metaphor was that of a fence, representing a sort of limit. And this is the second thought pattern, way of reasoning that is very common in the Western philosophical tradition. And it's sometimes referred to as deontological ethics or duty ethics. So very often when we teach our children, for example, ethical behavior, we tell them that, well, there are certain limits to what they may do. So, for instance, you may tell your sister that you're angry with her, but you may not hit her. Hitting is not right. Don't do it, even if it brings about the best consequences. It's just something you don't do, okay? So there is a sort of a limit there. And philosophers have developed this kind of thinking, this mode of thinking into so-called deontological ethics or duty ethics. So in contrast to consequentialism, deontological theories judge the morality of an action or policy based on rules, duties, principles, rather than just merely consequences. So on this view, some actions are always wrong, regardless of whether they have some fortunate or good outcomes or even give rise to the best overall consequences. Now, deontology is often associated with the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who argued that an action is only morally acceptable if it can be applied as a sort of universal law that everyone could follow. And this principle is called the categorical imperative. So Kant says that act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time wish that it should become a universal law. Now, this is a kind of a quite complicated normative theory, so I'm not going to go into any detail here. But basically what Kant says is that not only that an action is morally acceptable if it can be applied as a universal law that everyone can follow, this is sometimes referred to as the universality principle, but also that people should always be treated as ends in themselves, as valuable in themselves, not merely as means towards some other value. This is sometimes referred to as the reciprocity principle. Now, one of the strengths of deontology is that it protects individual rights, it could be argued, to a larger extent than, for example, utilitarianism or consequentialist theories. It doesn't allow sacrificing individuals for the greater good. And it also ensures that people are treated with respect, always as ends in themselves, not only as means to some other end. However, there are also some problems or challenges with this normative theory. Most of all, it is a bit rigid and inflexible, so it can lead to morally questionable outcomes if we follow strict rules without consideration for results. So take, for example, the obligation to never lie. Might be said that that is a duty. You should never lie. But what if a murderer enters your home and your friend is hiding there? Telling the truth when the murderer asks you, where is your friend? Oh, I have to tell the truth. Well, that will lead to some really bad consequences, right? Because then your friend will most likely be killed. So here it might seem morally right to actually violate this obligation, not to lie. It's better to lie, actually, than to tell the truth. So there is also the problem of conflicting duties. So what happens if two duties or obligations contradict each other? So, for example, in this case, the obligation to tell the truth and the obligation to protect life. Deontologists have tried to solve this problem by arguing that some obligations are more important than others. Okay, so you can rank the obligations. Some are higher order, some are lower order. And in that way, you can sort of solve dilemmas. So the duty not to kill, for example, or let somebody be killed, could be argued is more important than the duty to tell the truth, in the case I was just mentioning. Okay, so the last thing I want to mention before I think we should have a small break is the third way of reasoning. So we have I've talked about the scales, the weighing of consequences. I've talked about the fence, that there are absolute limits to things that you may not do regardless of the consequences. And the third way of thinking is represented by the compass, that of orientation. And this is a quite different normative theory. It's called virtue ethics. And so this is more of an agent-oriented normative theory than action-oriented. So it focuses on developing good character traits, to have an inner sense of moral orientation, rather than, giving action direction concerning certain acts or actions. So on this view, being ethical means more than being able to carry out some weighing of advantages or disadvantages or staying within given limits. An ethical person should have an inner sense of moral orientation. He or she should be a virtuous person. So instead of focusing on the rightness and wrongness of specific actions, virtue ethicists are more interested in what it means to develop good character traits or virtues. So instead of what should I do, they are interested in answering the question, well, what kind of person should I be? Okay? That's what ethics is about. And there are many examples of virtues discussed in the philosophical literature. It can be reliability, honesty, responsibility, having courage, and so on. But there is also an interesting discussion in relation to engineering and engineering ethics. And some philosophers have then argued that, well, engineers also have some professional virtues that they should develop, sort of the characteristics of a good engineer. Willingness to cooperate, make compromise, objectivity, being open to criticism, striving for quality in your work, being in the habit of reporting on your work carefully, and so on. So there is a quite interesting discussion in philosophy about virtues in relation to the engineering sciences, engineering practices. Okay, so among the strengths of virtue ethics are that it encourages people to be good persons, not just follow rules or produce certain outcomes. So on this view, ethics is more about self-improvement and lifelong learning. But it also has some weaknesses, I guess one could say. There is the problem of cultural differences in virtues. I mean, what are the virtues really? What does it mean to be a virtuous person? That can vary quite significantly across cultures. Also, it is difficult to measure. It's a measurement problem as well, to measure virtue. How do we determine if someone is truly virtuous? That's also difficult. And also a very common argument against virtue ethics is that it lacks clear action guidance. So when faced with a moral dilemma, telling a person to act, well, you know, you should act like a virtuous person. That's what you should do. Well, what is that? What should I do then in the Green Bridge case, for example? What would a virtuous person do? It's not so clear cut. So yes, so these are the three major philosophical ways of reasoning about giving justifications for certain actions. So just going back to the Green Bridge project case, should your firm disclose the uncertainty surrounding the new foundation system if it jeopardizes your bid? So that was one of the questions. Well, a utilitarianist would then perhaps argue that, well, yes, you should do that if there is a risk that the untested foundations might lead to environmental damage or structural failure, because the consequences, the bad consequences, would outweigh the benefits of winning the bid. So one would then reason in terms of consequences. How can I produce the best overall consequences? That is what determines what I should do. Whereas a deontologist would more likely perhaps reason and saying that, well, yes, the firm or I perhaps has a duty to be honest and transparent, regardless of whether it causes your firm to lose the contract. This is my duty. This is my obligation. And a virtue ethicist might argue that, well, a virtuous engineer would act with honesty, integrity. These are core values for me as an individual, but also me as a professional engineer. So disclosing the uncertainty is the right thing to do. It is the virtuous thing to do. So as we can see, it might be the case that you come to the same conclusion about what to do, but you have different justifications, right? So giving these justifications, arguing for your standpoint, is what ethics, normative ethics, is basically about. So that is how, hopefully, ethics can help you make decisions in the future as an engineer. Okay, so I will continue with some more on sustainable development, but I think we should take a break, right, Maria? Yes. So should we take like 10 minutes or that okay? Yeah, 10 minutes? Okay, good.
yeah. However, I have to mention that you're right. I think it's something that never, for example, for me, I never learned officially in the university, even in my master program and my PhD, maybe because DSW, University of New South Wales, assume that we all have it. Yes, yes. But it is very important because many cases that happen in Indonesia, basically by not understanding correctly the ethics. You mentioned that the scale, the fact, and the contrast is very, very important. Did you hear about the very big scandal in Indonesia just now from engineering point of view? So in Indonesia, a lot of companies are monopoly, right? So the oil company, Pertamina, it's very unfortunate. I cannot understand why, but several individuals mix the
welfare of the public, but also the environment and sustainable development. So I'm now going to talk a little bit more about sustainability issues and the concept of sustainable development and its normative foundations, right? I am assuming that you know a lot about sustainable development already, so I will be a bit quick here. But as you know, the concept of sustainable development, as is commonly used today, is defined in the World Commission of Environment and Development report, the Brundtland Commission. The Brundtland Commission was established in 1983 by the United Nations, and it was chaired by the former Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, who is in the photo here. And in this report, the Commission gives a definition of sustainable development that has been very influential to this day. And it basically says that development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, right? So, okay. See if we can. Okay, you will do it. Okay, thank you. Yes, so the concept of sustainable development is commonly understood as involving three interconnected dimensions. You know about this already, I think. Ecological, social, and economic. And there are actually different understandings of how these different dimensions are related to one another. So on the left-hand side here, the concept is operationalized through a so-called Venn diagram, where the three dimensions are represented through three interconnected circles. So you have the social dimension, the environmental dimension, and the economic dimension. And sustainable development is then at the nexus of these three dimensions. But according to this model, you could, for example, have social and economic sustainability that is not, environmentally sustainable. Whereas the model on the right-hand side instead shows a hierarchy between the dimensions. So ecological sustainability is attributed fundamental importance here. So on the right-hand side, you can see that there can be no economic and social sustainability without it also being environmentally sustainable. So the environment is sort of having environmental quality is sort of a prerequisite for reaching the social and environmental, social and economic sustainability goals. So there are these different ideas about how the dimensions are related to one another. Ecological sustainability is about everything that has to do with the Earth's ecosystems, stability of the climate system, air, water, land quality, biodiversity, and so on. And the basic idea is that human actions, production of goods and services, the way we live, etc., must not compromise the carrying capacity of ecosystems. So nature must have time to regenerate the resources that have been taken. So one way of expressing this, which has become very influential in recent years, thank you so much, is through the concept of planetary boundaries. So maybe you've heard of that concept of planetary boundaries. So the idea is basically here that there are ecological limits concerning climate change, land use, ocean acidification that must not be exceeded if we want to avoid damaging the productive capacity of our ecosystems. So that is the ecological dimension. Then, yes, thank you. We have the social dimension. And social sustainability is more about things like justice, power, rights, individual needs, that people should be given the opportunity to live good lives, to develop their full potential as human beings. And one way of understanding this is through the so-called donut model, which was developed by a British scientist called Kate Raworth, or economist. So the idea here is to supplement the sort of planetary boundaries with social boundaries. So sustainable development is partly about staying within the planetary boundaries and partly about ensuring that all people have the resources that they need, food, water, energy, to live good lives. So it's about creating a safe and just space for humanity. So what becomes clear, both when you look at the Brundtland Commission's definition of sustainable development and Kate Raworth's report, the donut model of social sustainability, is the idea that we humans need to live good lives, and this needs to be distributed fairly in some sense. So the concept of justice is very key, very basic in discussions about sustainable development. So we will come back to the concept of justice and what it means and what it entails. Now, the third dimension is the economic sustainability, and that is something I think that you will attend Professor Björn's lecture later on today, and I think he will talk about sustainable business a little bit and what that is. So I'm not gonna talk about that. So let me see if I can do it. No. Next. Yes. At the global level, the 3 dimensions of sustainable development are expressed through the Agenda 2030 goals. So I'm assuming that you are already familiar with Agenda 2030, so I'm not going to talk about that either, so we can skip that. And take the next slide. Yes, so from a philosophical point of view, we talked about the basic definition of sustainable development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So let's take a closer look at this principle and what its sort of its normative foundations are. Yes, no, you can go back. Thank you. So sustainable development, as it is expressed in the Brundtland Commission's report, reflects an anthropocentric, a human-centric ethic. The term anthropocentric comes from Greek, the Greek words anthropos or anthrop, which means human or something that relates to humans, so human-centered ethics. And anthropocentrism can be summarized in the form of 4 sort of core principles, namely the principles of human exceptionalism, nature's resource value, and then you have 2 justice principles, the intragenerational justice principle and intergenerational justice principle. And as a philosopher, I'm then interested in taking a closer look at these foundations, these normative foundations of the concept of sustainable development, and thinking about, well, are they reasonable? Can we justify them? Or could there be criticism that are interesting to look into? So if we take a look at human exceptionalism, thank you, first of all, it basically means that it is human beings and human needs that should be at the center of our concern for and relationship with nature. You know, the definition, needs of the present, and you should weigh them against the needs of future generations. But these needs are human needs, okay? It's not the needs of animals or the environment in any sort of greater sense. So environmental measures, policies should basically be assessed based on their impacts on humans. So it is humans and humans only that have intrinsic value. So I talked a little bit earlier about intrinsic versus instrumental value. And this distinction is quite important in philosophical discussions about the environment, for example. So intrinsic value basically is something that is valuable in itself, and things that are commonly believed to be to possess intrinsic value are things like happiness. It's sought for its own sake. Human beings are often considered to have intrinsic value, such as in Immanuel Kant's deontological theory. Whereas instrumental value is means that something is valuable as a means to something else that has value. So money, typically, would be considered having instrumental value. I can use money to satisfy my needs. So, yes. Yes, so this line of thought goes back a very long time in the Western philosophical tradition. So, for example, in Aristotle's Politics, Aristotle, maybe you've heard of him, he was a Greek philosopher living several hundred years before Christ was born, so very old philosopher, Greek philosopher. He wrote that everything in nature is created for humans, and non-human entities have only instrumental value. So animals, plants, ecosystems, they are all there for our sake. We can use them to satisfy our own needs. And in a similar fashion, here's a picture of Immanuel Kant. We talked about Kant earlier. He reflects on the phenomenon of animal cruelty. And he says that animal cruelty is wrong. But it's not wrong because you harm the animal, but it's wrong because it's harmful for the person committing it. It makes that person more prone to also being cruel to humans. So he's not really concerned with the animal or animal welfare. Why then are humans considered to be more valuable than other living organisms? What is the justification? How can we say that humans are more valuable than other animals? Well, philosophers have attempted to justify this reasoning by pointing to some morally relevant property that distinguishes humans from animals. So we can say, well, actually humans have these properties, and therefore they have moral standing, whereas animals do not have moral standing, or humans are more important from a moral point of view. So what are these properties then, suggested properties? Well, often the justification has been formulated in terms of the rational abilities of humans. So humans possess reason, animals do not possess reason, it is argued. We humans have a unique ability to solve complex problems, to think hypothetically, plan for the future, and so on. And this makes us more valuable than non-human animals and other organisms, it is argued. However, this way of reasoning has been criticized. Yes, I could say that other properties have been suggested too, like language. Humans have a language, animals do not, it is argued. Or friendship and other social, we have the capacity to form social relationships. We have the capacity for existential or religious experiences, which sort of also seems to distinguish us a little bit from other animals. Yes. So, yes. Okay, so, actually, this way of reasoning has been criticized. And it has been pointed out that, well, actually, there is not such great differences between humans and at least higher standing non-human animals. Because this criterion cannot be used to single out all and only humans. So there are actually humans who are not rational. Just think of children, small infants. They are not rational. They don't have rational capacities yet. So what does that mean? Does that mean that they are not valuable or that they do not have intrinsic value? We also have people with certain mental disabilities. And there also seems to be animal species that possess at least some rational capacities, right? Some animal species seem to communicate and have a language and so on. Form perhaps social relationships, to live in groups and so on. So we cannot really use these properties to distinguish human beings only. Okay, so we will come back to that. Secondly, nature's resource value sort of follows from this idea of human exceptionalism. So only humans and human needs satisfaction have intrinsic value, and non-human animals, plants, etc., on this view, they only have instrumental value. They are only valuable to the extent that they can benefit humans in some way. Okay, so now I would like you to discuss this. Intrinsic value, question mark. Do you agree that only humans have intrinsic value, are valuable in themselves? Why? If you believe that, or why not? Do we have any moral obligations towards non-human animals, plants, ecosystems, and so on? And why? If you believe we have obligations towards the environment, why? Why do we have that? So please use 4 to 5 minutes and discuss this with your neighbor, okay? So, okay, so let's hear from you. What do you think? Are humans the only things that have, the only entities that have intrinsic value? Or are humans more valuable than animals, plants, ecosystems? Any ideas? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. So I think human here are not the only one that have the intrinsic value, because we live in society and we live in the environment, and I think human have a dependency toward environment, because if we have a harmful environment, human can live in that harmful environment. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes. Thank you very much. So are you saying that we need to care for the environment because it's very important for us as human beings, so we cannot live without the carrying capacity of the environment, right? Yes. Mm?
The environment. Yes. Thank you, Miss.
Thank you. So as humans, we are highly dependent on the environment. So would you then also say that we as humans, are we more valuable than other species? Yes, right at the back.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I believe we are as valuable as other sentient or non-sentient being because we as a human is dependent on them. Like we cannot produce our own food because we cannot photosynthesis. So we are dependent on them. And in terms of absolute value, we are as valuable as them. But in our perspective as human, we are more valuable than non-sentient or sentient beings such as plant, animal, and other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are as valuable as other sentient beings.
Yeah, in the absolute way of thinking, but in our perspective of thinking, humans are more valuable
Yes,
than other
yes.
sentient or non-sentient beings.
Yeah. Thank you very much for those answers to those questions. I find this question is very interesting. As an environmental philosopher, I'm very interested in finding out about other people's views on these questions. And that can vary quite a lot across cultures as well, and in various societal groups. So I talked about anthropocentric theories, which place the sort of humans and human needs at the center of our concern for the environment. But there are also other competing ideas about environmental policy. And so we also have so-called non-anthropocentric theories, which depart from this basic tenet that humans are and humans only have intrinsic value. So according to these theories, there are various kinds, I will talk about it shortly. It is not only humans have intrinsic value, but other life forms, organisms, and or ecological wholes. And by ecological wholes, I mean ecosystems, species, habitats, things like that, are valuable in themselves too. They also have intrinsic value. And so it is actually not humans, but nature that should be at the center of our decisions. So there are various forms of non-anthropocentric theories. Two very influential such theories are called biocentrism and ecocentrism. But they differ slightly about exactly what entities in nature have intrinsic value. Is it living organisms only, or higher order living organisms only, or also ecological wholes like species and ecosystems? And they also differ slightly about whether all entities that are ascribed intrinsic value are equally valuable. So if we take a look at the idea of biocentrism, the key idea here is that all living organisms, not just humans, have intrinsic moral value, but not ecological wholes. So species, ecosystems, etc., do not possess intrinsic value, only living organisms. So when we make decisions, we must consider how our decisions affect the well-being of living organisms. And the question is, well, which living organisms are we talking about, and how can we justify this idea? And here, again, there are different ideas. So the extension of moral status to non-human organisms can be justified on different grounds. According to one very influential theory, at least some non-human living organisms have the capacity to suffer and experience pleasure. You remember Jeremy Bentham's ideas about pain and pleasure, that these are all that counts in the utility calculus. But then people say, well, pain and pleasure, you know, some animals can also experience pain and pleasure. So why shouldn't they count in the utility calculus? Why is it only human pleasure that counts? So they want to extend this way of reasoning to include also some sentient The gentleman at the back mentioned sentient organisms, and they want to include sentient organisms into the moral calculus. So a common justification, as I said, is sort of the capacity to suffer and experience pleasure. There have been some challenges to also biocentrist theories, saying that, well, it excludes non-sentient nature, so we should also care about, entities that may not be sentient, like plants, rivers, species, ecosystems, etc. So so it's very difficult if you have this view to justify environmental protection beyond animal welfare. So it's argued. Lack of knowledge is another challenge. We do not fully know today which species have the experience to experience pleasure or pain. We are in the process of learning about other species, right? And their nervous systems. So maybe also insects, maybe bees, maybe we don't know. They might also have the capacity to suffer and should be included in the moral calculus. Also, it has been criticized for conflicting with ecosystem management. So sometimes it demands sparing individual animals, species that are actually harmful for the ecosystem. Sometimes you need to kill individual animals. In Sweden, we have each autumn we have this elk hunt. So 1 week a year, people go out into the forest and they hunt elk. You know what elks are? Yeah, large, a bit like a cow, but much larger. With a horse or a deer, very large deer. So they go out and they hunt them, and it's necessary to maintain the vitality of the ecosystem, because if they are allowed to just grow and grow, the populations grow and grow, it will just harm the ecosystems. So you need to kill them, or so it's argued. But if you adhere to this view, then that is problematic, because individual animals are more valuable than ecosystems, for example. It has also been argued that this way of thinking about the environment is actually harmful because it may lead to anthropocentric thinking. So it does expand the moral circle beyond humans, but it still relies on sort of human-like experiences, pleasure and pain, as the basis for value. And this may, it is argued, unintentionally continue a kind of human-centered thinking, valuing nature only insofar as it resembles us humans in some way. So it's still quite human-focused. Thank you. So ecocentric ideas, on the other hand, they are not so interested in individual organisms. They are more interested in, or put greater value, I should say, on ecological wholes, species, ecosystems, habitats, and they actually ascribe intrinsic value to these ecological wholes and not just to individual organisms. And on this view, humans are not separate from or superior to nature, but we are just one part of the Earth's ecological system. And I think this was you mentioned this as well, that we rely on these ecosystems. But they would argue that the ecosystems are valuable in themselves, not just as resources for our own benefit. So it's a quite radical theory. It puts value on these ecological wholes, and that is quite radical, actually. So on this view, there is nothing morally wrong with killing or removing an invasive species, for example, to protect an entire ecosystem. So the health of the entire ecosystem is more important than the survival of any single species. So hunting elks in Sweden would not be a problem at all on this view, to safeguard the ecosystem. But here there are also some challenges. Yes. it has been argued that it disregards the moral standing of individuals. So you prioritize the system over individuals, and this can lead to some morally troubling outcomes. So you would then typically eradicate invasive species to protect the ecosystem without concern for their suffering, or so it is argued. It's considered a bit vague and hard to apply. What does it mean to maintain ecosystem stability, ecosystem health? Ecosystems are dynamic and ever-changing, so it's not really clear what counts as a healthy or natural state. Also, there is, it has been argued that there is a risk of so-called eco-fascism. So if the good of the ecosystem is more important than, for example, humans or human rights, that might open the door to eco-authoritarianism. So the greater good of the environment could be used to justify harm or injustice towards human beings. Yes. So those are basically the three environmental ethical theories that I wanted to introduce: anthropocentrism, biocentrism, and ecocentrism. And I'm obviously just scratching the surface here, giving a very, very brief introduction to these normative ideals. So I would love to go further into detail at some point, maybe coming back and discussing it with you, together with you, and hear your views about these ideas. Okay, I also mentioned the justice principles. So sustainable development also contains an idea of justice, and intragenerational justice basically means justice across humans living today. So we should also share the planet's resources on a global scale. It's not okay for some countries to just, develop and use other countries as instruments or means towards their own development. But it should be distributed fairly across the globe. And this is quite, so there's a strong connection to poverty eradication or alleviation. And this idea is, for example, addressed in the Rio Declaration, which was adopted in connection with the UN conference a few years after the Brundtland Commission's report was published. So it says that in order to reduce disparities in living standards and to better meet the needs of the majority of the world's population, all states and peoples must cooperate in the urgent task of eradicating poverty, which is a prerequisite for sustainable development. So it's not enough that people's needs are met in a country like Sweden. They should be met all over the globe. We need to share the resources in order to accomplish that. But also, importantly, there is this principle or idea of intergenerational justice. So the needs of all humans presently alive on the planet need to be balanced against the future needs, the needs of future generations. And this is a very core principle of sustainable development. So we who are living today are not allowed to use nature as a resource to meet our needs in a way that compromises the ability of future generations to satisfy their needs. So it's a sort of temporally extended principle of justice based on the norm that all human lives, both present and future, are valuable. So we who are living today bear a responsibility toward future generations to use nature, ecosystem services in a way that is efficient in the long term. Okay. So I have a few more minutes, and I think there is a last discussion case that I would like you to consider before we finish. The lithium rush. A developing country discovers a massive lithium deposit beneath a remote mountainous region. Lithium is essential for batteries used in electric vehicles and renewable energy storage, making it critical for the green energy transition. The government plans to begin large-scale extraction to boost the national economy, create jobs, and support the global shift away from fossil fuels. However, the mining process will damage fragile alpine ecosystem and pollute local water resources for a very long time. The lithium supply is finite. It will eventually run out. Once used, it is hard to recycle, and current recycling tech is underdeveloped. So, and the question for you then is, how should we weigh the needs of the present generation against the rights and needs of future generations? How much emphasis can we put on satisfying our own needs if it compromises the ability of future generations to also satisfy their needs? And what moral responsibilities do we have to people who actually don't exist today? Do we have a greater responsibility to care for people who actually live today? Or should we also consider potential future people? Okay? So maybe 2 minutes. You can discuss with your friends, your neighbor. Okay, so very briefly before we finish, how should we weigh satisfaction of our own needs against the needs of future generations? Yes, sir, you wanted to.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity again. The first thing, how we should weigh the needs of present against the needs of the future generation. I believe the best possible scenario from this case is we are extracting the lithium for utilize the opportunity in the market, and we use the profit to fund more sustainable program in the future. I believe the best case scenario can we use is like Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, that they are funded through their oil extraction. So we extract this lithium and utilize the opportunity and use the profit and the wealth that they generate generated from these activities to first remedy the negative effect from the exploration, and the second is to fund a more sustainable economic sector. I believe that is the best case scenario for this case. Thank you.
Excellent, very good. So what you're saying is that, well, actually it's okay, it's good to develop natural resources, because that is also a way of developing our societies. So, yes.
Yes, I believe we are a special developing country has the right to develop and utilize our natural resources. But of course, there is environmental needs that we can be remedied through the wealth that we gain from exploration and utilization of natural resources.
Yes. So by developing natural resources, you can develop your country, and even if you use them, I mean, even if they are used up, so that you don't leave for future generations any such resources, well, you will then instead transfer economic development to them, so they can still satisfy their own needs.
Yes, I believe while the resources may be gone, but the wealth that create from the resources are still there.
Yes, exactly. So very good. Yes. So the idea behind this reasoning is that there is substitutability between natural resources and economic capital. So natural capital and economic capital. So the question is then, well, what should we transfer to future generations? How much should we save for future generations? And there are different answers to that question. So according to this so-called static intergenerational justice principle, we have a moral obligation to leave behind the same type of resources that we have been given from our forefathers. So that's a very conservative principle. We cannot use anything, basically. So that is hardly what the principle of sustainable development entails. Instead, I think what you are mentioning, sir, is the strong intergenerational justice principle. So we have a moral obligation to use resources in such a way that future generations can be expected to achieve a comparable quality of life to us. So by developing and using natural resources, we can develop our societies, and it will be a richer society for our children. So that is sort of the basic idea here. And there is also the weak intergenerational justice principle, which basically says that we have a moral obligation to use resources in a way that allows future generations to meet their basic needs. So this principle puts greater emphasis on the present generation. So it's okay for us to use resources and not leave so much behind for future generations. We should just leave so much that they can meet their basic needs. So there are these sort of different ideas about how much we can use and how much we should leave for future generations. And it, of course, depends on how easily the resource can be recycled and how easily it can be replaced by other materials or other types of production and consumption. Okay, so you have been very patient with me today. Thank you for listening to me. And this is just a summary of today's lecture, the key sort of takeaways that I would like you to maybe think about later. We talked about engineering codes of conduct. Maybe there are professional engineering societies and organizations in Indonesia that have adopted similar codes of conduct or guidelines. So please go out online and check if there are such guidelines. I talked about 3 basic normative theories, the metaphors. We talked about consequentialism, utilitarianism, weighing outcomes, deontology, the fence, that there are absolute duties, that rules that mustn't be overrun, virtue ethics. We talked about the principle of sustainable development and it being an anthropocentric idea, distinguished by human exceptionalism, nature's resource value. We looked at some criticisms, again, against the idea of nature's resource value. There are competing environmental ethical ideas, biocentrism, ecocentrism. And we talked a little bit, very briefly, about generational justice. And also I introduced this distinction between intrinsic and instrumental values, which is very central to philosophy and ethics. All right, so Maria, I'm done. Maybe we should, we need to move on to another meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that if we want to learn about ethics, 2 hours it seems too short for us to learn. But during Ibu Karin lecture, I wrote several ideas, guys. Do you know the case just happened a couple months ago about nickel fraud? Harley Sandra Dewi husband, do you know? Very big case in Indonesia when you learn about the estimated, loss, yeah, experienced by Indonesia, the number is like unbelievable. How come? Because the KPK, the Commission for Anti-Corruption, also calculate the loss of environment inside the equation. So actually, I don't know, because this is your first time learn about ethics, right? Nabila, it is your first time learning about ethics? Yeah. When we learn something like this, we need to digest, and the case study given by Prof.Karin actually eye-opening. For example, the question about which one more important, human being or the ecosystem? Yeah, maybe theoretically we can say yes, everything is important, but if you can see surrounding, how much we sacrifice the environment for the welfare of human being, right? A lot of homework, thank you so much. I know that the time is so limited, but is there any question? Maybe the answer will be delivered later, not now, but at least we can jot down several questions. So if you have question, Rivaldo and Komang, could you please help me to write the question, and later, because Prof. Karin will be here until tomorrow, and we are going to discuss the possibility to work to collaborate. I myself, Prof. Moses, I think we need to insert ethics into our curriculum because it is very important. You can see now in the mass media a lot of problem in Indonesia, and I guess because we don't have ethics education in
Yes,
our
and
education.
that is a very good point, Professor Maria. And also, I would like to emphasize that if you do that, also please consider that your own philosophical traditions. So there is a
Yes,
lot
correct.
of thinking about the relationship between man and nature in
Yes.
Buddhist thought, for example, and
Yes.
you know, so you have your own philosophical traditions as well as the ones I have presented.
We have global values, global belief, but we also have to put it in the context of Indonesia.
Yes.
A lot of things. So, any question? We are not going to answer now because the time is very limited, and after this, Prof. Karin will attend meeting with Dr. Rizky as well, but we will write down. From this side, Fajar, quick one ya, quick one. Boleh bantu Mbak Komang untuk mikrofon atau Afan? Boleh bantu Mbak Afan mikrofon? Ya, Fajar please.
Okay, thank you again for the opportunity. A bit opening. Doing engineering project and extraction of natural resources the right way, of course, costs a lot of time and monetary value. So we as a developing nation may not have that resources all the time because back again, opportunity to exploit or use natural resources is very limited by the market. My question regarding this question is, first, can we consider ethic in monetary value, and can we doing benefit cost analysis of doing the right things? The second is, there is any way to embed ethics in the cost-effective way during engineering project or natural resources extraction? Thank you.
Afan boleh gantian ya, Mbak. Kamu rekam biar ini ya. Record ya. Actually big homework. I ever thought about how to put sustainable development into engineering economic equation. Yeah, okay. Could you please type your question ya? And Ian, please.
Wait, okay, thank you. So I just want to ask about the ethics application to Green Bridge project from the ideology ethics for the thick conflict. If a company has a dual obligation, honestly, the clients and responsibility to the employers, for example, in maintaining jobs, which should take precedence. And the second is absolute honesty, always realistic in a competitive business environment. And I have one question for last. Does full transparency include disclosing all technical uncertainties or only significant ones? Who determines the boundaries? Thank you.
The boundaries. Thank you. It is very important. Other question from this side? Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Karin. Maybe my question is, what should we do when we face a car bus? Like in example, in Green Bridge project, when we disclose the company secret, it might be dangerous for us, and it might, in overall happiness, it is become big, but for my safety, it become dangerous. Okay, thank you. What should we do?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Decide, any question? Please.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, as we know, most of the case in Indonesia right now, most likely, if we're talking about the engineering project, most likely the people will consider the lower cost over the implementation of the ethics. So my question is, sometimes it feels a bit difficult for us to prioritize to implement the ethics. And my question, do you have a suggestion on how we starting to promote implementing the ethics, but also still consider the costs? Thank you, Miss.
Thank you so much. You have question? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Prof. My master thesis is talking about in the customer perspective. So sustainable business have to support from both side, from the producer and also the customer. I just want to ask, is the ethic also implement or is there any ethic for the consumer to support the all of the effort that already make from a producer? Is there any ethic from the customer perspective too? Thank you.
Just to let you know that tomorrow we will have podcast with Prof. Karin and all the question will be answered tomorrow. Any question from the side? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much for Prof. Karin for the insight. I just curious about how is the implementation of the engineering code of ethics in Sweden, and have the decision made in project, for example, truly follow the ethical principles? Because as we know that many companies or business tend to focus more on the profit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, any other question? Last one from the side? Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I want to ask about the code of ethics for engineering. Are there any penalties for non-performance or violation? And then how your country enforce these rules and we can adopt it for your country like that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. No more question? Everyone, I'm very happy because this is a really eye-opening session, even for me. I learned about the scale, the fence, the compass, and I truly believe it is really needed. It is really needed. We have to have the guidance. Otherwise, intellectually, we improve, we develop, but without moral guidance and ethic, it is also dangerous. So thank you so much once again, Prof. Really appreciate because you come with very important topic and explain very clearly, even though the time is so limited, but I believe it is not the end of our cooperation. So once again, appreciate for your time, your effort. Big applause for Prof. Karin. Everyone, please keep in touch, okay? Because tomorrow we will have short podcast and I will inform you the opportunity that will be discussed in the global engagement after this. If possibility comes, yesterday Professor Björn discussed with us. The pronunciation is right, Björn? Yes, okay. And he said that KTH in the LPDP list, and they receive many scholars, many students from Indonesia through LPDP program. So for postgraduate program. So very much possible if you want to learn from a very high reputable university, this is opportunity for you. Later on, 1 to 3, there is an opportunity for you to learn from the session. I will share with you the flyer. There is an opportunity to go to the global engagement. 1 to 3, you will have opportunity to learn, opportunity to study in KTH. Okay? 1 to 3, I will share with you the flyer. and you can go to the Global Engagement Office to learn about opportunity to study in Sweden. Yeah, thank you so much once again. Appreciate your time and see you later, guys. Thank you.